Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, for obviously for your patience having uh, jumped into the middle of a conversation. But as you can tell, I'm a little bit thrown off by being in a brand new office here at Starbucks. So I just wanted to welcome everyone and wish everyone a happy Indigenous Peoples Day in recognition of this day. And this is our second out of three collaborations this fall with LA Skins Fest. This particular panel is Native American USC graduates return, and it's always very special when we get to talk with our alumni. So this particular collaboration is between the USC School of Cinematic Arts, LA Skins Fest, and USC Visions and Voices, the Arts and Humanities Initiative. And before we get started, I wanted to welcome on Patricia Gomez to talk about LA Skins Fest.
Thank you, Alex. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Thank you for spending this evening with us. I just want to go ahead and say thank you to the USC Vision and Voices department, and also the School of Cinema for partnering with us this year. Again, my name is Patricia Gomez. I am the LA Skins Fest Festival Director. The LA Skins Fest is a Native American film festival that runs every November. And we are celebrating our 15-year, November 16th to the 21st. We're going to be having a hybrid festival with in-person and also virtual events. One of the panels is going to be held at the USC campus on Thursday, November 18 at 7 p.m. So you definitely, if you're in campus, you should stop by and check it out. It's going to be a panel focusing on Native American women in animation. So that's going to be really cool to look at. Lastly, our third annual Native American Animation Lab submissions is we're currently taking applications for that. So if you're a Native American writer, artist, or a filmmaker who is interested in that area, please do apply for a program. Our deadline, our early deadline is tomorrow, but we also have two upcoming deadlines coming for that program. So if you are interested in applying, definitely check out nama.media and apply for the program. You could also send us an email if you have any questions about how to apply. With that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Professor Maddox, who is going to start us off with a land acknowledgement. So
thank you so much, Patricia. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to start with this acknowledgement adapted from the work from the Committee for a Greater LA. We acknowledge that the area now called Los Angeles County is on the traditional homelands of the Chumash, Tataviam, Serrano, Cahuilla, Juaneño, Luiseño, and Tongva people. We pay our respects to the traditional caretakers of the land, the Tongva Nation, their ancestors, elders, and relations, past, present, and forthcoming. Native people continue to reside in and around what we now call Los Angeles County, the county that is currently home to one of the largest populations of Native people in the United States. We recognize this land acknowledgement is limited and requires us to engage in an ongoing process of learning and accountability. I also want to acknowledge the home states and tribal lands of our panelists, which include places now known as the Dakotas, Oklahoma, Illinois, Idaho, Minnesota, and Arizona. It's important to know who we come from, and it's important to bring them with us. So thank you all so much for joining me tonight. Thank you for letting me moderate. I'm reporting to you live from my car because the power is out in my building. But I'd love to start off by having you each just introduce yourselves briefly. Everyone's read your bio from the flyer, but we'd love to hear specifically about your journey as an artist and how USC played into that. What was great and inspired you, and what, if anything, left you wanting more? So if we can just, I'm just going to go in the order that I see you. Miranda, can we start with you?
Yeah, Nawa, my name is Miranda Dew. I'm from the Pawnee Nation, and I'm also Cherokee and Oto. I went to USC to study interactive media and game design. Um, and I I grew up in Oklahoma. I didn't really know much about how to make video games, but I ended up at USC, and it was really an eye-opening experience, just to be around such amazing storytellers, and to be in a place where we could study that craft. It's not something I was exposed to growing up, so it was really special for me to um, learn from some of the greatest people in my industry. I now work at Treyarch. I'm a producer for our core engineering team, and I also lead some diversity and inclusion efforts within our studio and Activision. I've worked on Call of Duty. Black Ops Cold War was the most recent title we shipped, and I'm also the chair of the International Game Developers Association, Los Angeles chapter, as well as the Impact and Inclusion co-chair for the Women of Cinematic Arts, which is the USC Women's Alumni Organization.
Thank you so much. Keeping incredibly busy, it sounds like.
Yes.
Sonya, will you go next?
Hi, I'm Sonya Oberly. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. I'd like to acknowledge my background. If you're in Hominy, Oklahoma, happy Osage Day. If you're in Nez Perce country, Nimipu country, we actually just acknowledged the Battle of the Bears Paw last week, which was the end of the 1877 war. And if you're in Numanu Comanche territory, every day is Indigenous Day. So I just hope everyone had time. There's like a fly bottom. I hope that everyone had time to spend time with your friends and family. And my perspective is just a little different. I got my MFA from USC in film and television production because I was coming from counseling and psychology as my undergrad. And so I figured I knew like starting mid-career that I would needed to like kind of pick an upper tier school to study with just to get my base skills, you know, noticed. So I picked USC and luckily I did get in and I learned, and I like the approach that they just threw you in the water and just like figured that you would figure out what was going on. So I was like thrown into editing and screenplay writing and directing, which was like the best thing for me because the learning curve was like that. So I had to catch on very quickly. And currently I work in the Pacific Northwest and I'm still working in documentary film and I'm a media consultant as well.
Thank you very much. Rhiana, you go next.
Okay. Yat Yinshye Rhiana Yazzie. I'm Rhiana Yazzie and I am citizen of Navajo Nation. I'm Dina, and I live here in Dakota Territory, which is the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And I went to USC as a grad student as well. And I was in a professional writing program. And I moved out here to Minnesota. At the time, I was really just focused on theater, and so I started my career off as a playwright and a theater maker. And I had started a theater company in the Twin Cities, and it's called New Native Theater, and it centers Native artists and community. It focuses on telling stories that are interesting and relevant to Native minds first, and don't really spend a lot of time focusing on educating non-Native folks, because I feel like the thing that's missing in narrative storytelling are stories that we as Native folks can just relate to without having to have that extra burden of educating others. So I ultimately got into film about 6 years ago when I started to work on some independent films that came through the Twin Cities. And I was really fortunate to work with Nichols' screenwriting project that really sort of opened my eyes to how I wanted to start really thinking seriously about it. And then I was really lucky that a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker turned narrative filmmaker, came through the Twin Cities and made a film called Astray, Musa Saeed. And I worked on that film as a production coordinator and a script supervisor and an actor, and essentially sort of did the production end of the part of the story that had to do with the Native community in Minneapolis. And we saw this, it was a very small crew. It was like 7 people. To me, it looked like, oh, it's kind of like theater. You can put it together really easily. So just about a year later, I ended up using a playwriting fellowship that I received to make my first feature. So don't tell anyone I used my theater money to get into film. And I am now finished with that first feature, and it will be hitting film festivals this year. And I'm super excited to be starting on my second narrative feature called Unspe Wankatia College Education that I am adapting with playwright Alex Hesbrook Ramier. We produced her play at my theater company and decided to turn it into a film. So that's where I am right now, and I really appreciate being asked to be on this panel with all these amazing folks. Yeah.
Welcome back to USC, even if it's virtually. It definitely seems like something everybody has in common is like the need to just push your sleeves up and like get in and do the thing. Yelyna, will you go next?
Okay, am I unmuted? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Yelyna de Leon, coming to you live actually from Cal State right now. I am Azteca of Huasteca tribe, and I was raised in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm an actor, writer, producer, and currently an educator here at Cal State LA. I did go to USC for my master's in film and television production. And my journey has been a journey of the actor's journey of like really wanting to have ownership of the stories that we are telling, because I was, I've been a working actor in the industry, but it's usually a stereotypical roles. So I wanted to go back to school. When I went to USC, I said, I want to go to the best school where I can learn how to make my own projects, whether that's I'm going to write them, I'm going to direct them, I'm going to produce them. So that's really what brought me back to school when I went to get my master's degree, because I said, you know what, I'm out here in the industry, I'm working, but I'm not seeing the stories told that I want to be told and that I want to be a part of, and that I'm proud to tell. So that was like one of the main reasons that I went back to school. I have done several projects of my own since then, most currently a feature film called Murder in the Woods, which is starring an all multicultural cast, people of color. And I always say brown is beautiful, so I make sure to always put beautiful brown faces up on that big screen. Danny Trejo is one of our stars, and you can currently watch it on Tubi for free. So please check it out. It's a slasher and it's Halloween season, so check it out. And I'm just happy to be here today. I just finished the class. I let them go home early. They were happy. And I was like, well, it is Indigenous Peoples Day, so you shouldn't even be here right now, but go ahead, go home. So I let them go home. So that's why I'm here in the classroom right now. But yeah, I'm very excited to be here with this, with the wonderful panelists and discuss all things that should be talked about, which is us.
Thank you so much. And Alex has just thrown a link to the Tubi in a chat, so I'll be giving myself nightmares later. Awesome. Lucas, would you like to round us out?
Yep. All right. I did the mute thing. Hi, I'm Lucas Brown Eyes. I'm Oglala Lakota. I did cinema television production, and I did it kind of because I went into undergrad and I wanted to kind of know, I knew I wanted to do TV writing, but I wanted to know like the whole process. I wanted to know like how everything was done. And it was great. It really, USC kind of focuses on how to tell the story versus like specific techniques and all that stuff. And like, the emphasis is on the story. And then when I graduated, I was like, oh no, I don't know how to be a TV writer. So I panicked a little, and I looked around. I'm like, well, what are all the other Native TV writers? How did they do it? There were two at the time. This was 2014, and they both went through this thing called the ABC Writing Program. So I kind of, put all my luck, I guess, into that, and I got into it. Immediately broke it because I staffed the first week, but I staffed on a show called Young and Hungry, and since then, I've been writing for shows on Freeform, Disney, Netflix, PBS. I sold a show called Reservations based on my life. And currently I'm working on a show for HBO Max called Duster. And it's pretty cool. It's like this big action thriller with J.J. Abrams, LaToya Morgan. It's really cool. And now I'm here.
And now you're here. You can go from J.J. Abrams to here, and it's definitely just fully uphill. Awesome. I am so excited to talk to you more about your work. I'd like to start by inviting everybody to kind of look back and see if you could identify a moment that led you down the specific artistic paths. I know you all just delineated about 8 different paths apiece, but was there a specific moment that made you feel like, this is the thing that I need to do? And I'm not going to go in order. You guys can just jump in now. Be brave.
I was watching a lot of TV and I was like, I want to do that. And it was fairly early on in my life.
Strong, same, yes.
Not an interesting story.
I like we all make these pitches for the stories that need to be told. It's like, yeah, I was watching television.
Watching television, I'm like, I want to do that. Of course, I was in South Dakota at the time. So it felt like it was 1,000 miles away. And actually what happened was, I grew up with this huge family. It was like me, my mom, my aunt, my brothers, my cousins, my grandma, and sometimes my uncle. And then what happened was my oldest brother died, and it actually kind of crumbled my family. I actually just it dwindled down to just me and my mom. So went from like 10 people to just me and my mom, and we were living in someone's basement. And she's like, she knew she had to do something drastic, and I'm 13 at the time. So she goes, if we could go anywhere and start over, where would it be? And I'm 13, so I'm dumb, and I go Hollywood, because I was a jazz hands kid. And because I wanted to make television. I was kind of like a native Bobby Hill, except I knew less. And then my mom, she does something equally as dumb. She goes, okay. So we hopped in our van and we drove to Hollywood, Santa Ana, which is in Orange County. It's about an hour and a half, 2 hours away, and nothing like Hollywood at all. But like that step, I guess, would be the delineation, because just being there. Actually, the day we got down there, there's this arts high school. It's kind of like Fame, but for like film and television. They were having their last day of auditions there, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do that. Yes, like this is fate. Like the day I got down there, last day of auditions. And my mom actually had a job interview too, so she went from like her job interview to this audition place. And they're like, we like you, but this is a competitive school. You have to get like a video and a script. And like, I'd never touched a video camera. I didn't know what a script was. That's not possible, and it kind of felt like I was kicked out before we got into the gates. And my mom was like, nope, we're Lakota. We don't give up without a fight. So she took me to a library. I looked up what a script was. I wrote one. Then she took me to a pawn shop and started pawning her jewelry to get me a video camera. And I filmed a video that night, and I got into this art school, and my mom got the job. And so that's a pretty cool story. And that kind of led me to, I guess, where I am today.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I'll actually base this on the essay I wrote to get into USC, because my grandparents loved like TV and movies, but they like be flipping through the channels, and every time my grandma would stop and say, is that Jeff Chandler? And then I never made the connection. It's like, oh, I don't know, Grandma, and we'd split. And then and she'd always look for it. It's like, is that Jeff Chandler? And then like years later, I realized Jeff Chandler's the white guy that always played like the chief in the movies. So it's like, that's kind of sad that my grandma was looking for Jeff Chandler. And then other things she would watch was like Munsters, because that family's like our family, and it's intergenerational. There's different characters. We don't have necessarily werewolves in the family lineage, I don't think, but it was just trying to find the representation there. So something clicked, and then I thought, how do I get our stories like told? How do I get our exposure out there, something from our background? So that's that led to the idea of actually applying to film school.
Thank you.
I'll jump in. I actually thought there was a little moment there after I graduated from USC, and I had started working at a theater company in Little Tokyo, East West Players, and I was just thinking, like, how can you be a writer for a living? Like, is this even possible? So I thought, well, I probably shouldn't do that. And I should keep going on with this grant writing that I'm doing. And so I did the next step of, after becoming a grant writer, getting a job at a philanthropic foundation. And so I became an arts program manager. And it's probably like the most torturous thing to do if you are yourself an artist, is to watch other artists be themselves and happy and amazing, and give them lots of money, which is the great part about it. But to just sort of be behind this glass. But luckily, I got fired in like 9 months. but the month of, I think it was like the month I got fired, I found out that I won this national writing fellowship, and ended up moving to the Twin Cities. So once that happened, I felt validated, like I can be a writer. And so I've been on that path ever since.
I love stories that have, luckily I got fired in the middle of that. Something good always happens.
Luckily, right?
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I'll go
I can-
next.
Oh,
I'm
go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll go real quick. I went to like a math and science high school, and I thought for the longest time, like, oh, I'll go into medicine. That seems cool. But then I had a cadaver lab and decided that was just not it for me. I'll stick to watching house. And but one thing I did learn there is I started taking computer programming classes, and I was like, oh, I really get this. I like it. It's really cool, but I kind of want something more. I miss, the arts. I miss painting. I miss photography. And so I ended up going to this summer program at Carnegie Mellon. I got the diversity scholarship. So they sent me up there to do this video game academy. And I was like one of like 7 girls in the whole program. It was very intimidating, but that was my first exposure to like what the games industry could be like. And I ended up taking that portfolio, which got me into USC. And when I applied to USC, I had no idea like anything about the film school. I didn't do my research. I just saw like, oh, interactive media program. That sounds cool. But I came out for, to visit, and it was really mind blowing just, to walk through the halls of USC and just see, all these people and their dreams come true, and just to see those stories that they started to tell. And I, was like, okay, like this might be a really cool medium where I can tell my story and help other people tell their stories through games. And it was kind of, it's still a budding industry. So it seemed like a really fun and new experience to embark on.
Thank you. Yelyna?
Yeah. So my story starts way, way, way back when I was a kid. I actually was the translator for my grandparents, who were hard of hearing. So I have a really loud voice just because I just always had to speak loud to my grandparents, which really helps in the theater, which that's the world that I come from. However, it was very cold winters, like I've spent in Chicago. And it was one of the most like dangerous, it's still actually one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city. So as a kid, you can't really go out. And in the summers, we just love going outside, just right outside of our house. That's all we can go. We couldn't do anything. So there wasn't much to do, is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, my memory, I'm going back to that moment and I'm just like, oh my God. So there was one day where there's a knock on the door and I go downstairs and there's this man. I didn't know who he was. And they're like, oh, is your mom home? And I'm like, no, she's not. And he's like, oh, so you're home alone? I was like, no. I was like, my grandparents are here. They're like, oh, okay, well, can we talk to them? Because we want to shoot here. Now, for me, shooting is a different story. I have no idea what they're talking about. You want to shoot here? What? So I run upstairs and I'm like, grandma, I'm like, there's a man downstairs and he says he wants to shoot here. And she's like, no, tell him I said no, tell him I said no. So I have to run back down the stairs and I see this man, through the little window. And I'm like, she said no. And he's like, well, we're doing this TV show and, we have money. We have like, I don't know, he offered her like $400 or something. Just go tell her. And I was like, okay. So I go upstairs, right? It's a 2-story house. And I'm like, grandma, they said, they have $400. And she's like, okay, fine. Tell him to come in, right? So then for an entire week, I had this primetime network NBC show shooting in my house. So I had all the stars. It was the late Dennis Farina. I had the director. I had all the producers, the writers. They were literally every morning. They would come to have breakfast because my grandmother had no idea what craft services was. So she thought all these people are coming. She got $400. So she started making breakfast for everybody. And of course, they would rather eat her breakfast because it was, you know, very good versus like their craft services. So there I am, this nosy little kid, right? And the shot that they really needed to do was from my second story porch because this is before drones, obviously. And they were going to shoot some guy in the alley, right? Gangster style. And I remember asking the director, like, you know, is there anything that I could do? And he's like, actually, there is. He's like, when you hear the gunshot, he's like, I just need you to go up to the window and just kind of look outside. And I was like, really? Because usually when I hear a gunshot, I'm supposed to run and like hide underneath my bed. So I don't know if I should be doing this, you know? I was a little kid. I didn't know. And he was like, no, it's not real. It's not real. And I was like, it's not? Okay. So I ended up doing it, in essence, becoming an extra, right? Just my hand. So a week later, I'm watching television with my grandparents because my grandmother loved watching, you know, every show there was on. Because again, in Chicago, there's not much to do except watch TV. And so I remember watching it and not just seeing my house, but seeing myself there. And something just switched in my brain. Like, how is that? To me, it was magic, right? I'm like, I want to learn how to do that. Like, how do we do that? Right. So since then, I've been searching for those answers. Like, how do I do that? But at the same time, that has been a helpful reminder every time that I encounter anything that I don't agree with in Hollywood, where I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't come searching for Hollywood. Hollywood actually came knocking on my door. And I have to remember that. And it really has been very helpful. But I remember the moment that my grandma was like switching the channels and she would watch all these telenovelas. And I would be like, okay, why are there all these blonde, blue-eyed white people on the show, right? Like, okay, that's all I'm seeing. That was all I ever saw. So from that moment on, I was like, I need to change this. I don't know how I'm going to do it, you know, but that spark came to me literally as a kid. So that's my story of how I ended up here in Hollywood.
It literally came to your door and offered you $400.
It did.
Rhiana spoke earlier about focusing on work that doesn't require Native artists to do educating of their audience. And I wonder if you could also each share with folks a time when you had to do that, like what having to educate your audience or a collaborator or a fellow artist about what they're trying to do, how that impacts the creative process.
Every project ever, every single one, everyone. And this is a broad statement, but it is more accurate than it's not. Everyone that's not Native has such a low knowledge of actual Native American experiences. They've been taught, if they are taught at all, but they've been taught an inaccurate version of what Native Americans are. So like, sometimes you're undoing that. Sometimes they are aware that like, hey, I know what I've been taught is bullshit. Tell me. So you know, it varies from like unteaching to teaching. But yeah, pretty much every project I've ever worked on that wasn't just Natives, you have to do it. There's a level of education that we don't have on the Native American experience through like culture, through television, through films, all that, through, I mean, music. It's just not there. So and anytime, pretty much. I think I have one producer who like I can assume that she would know the things I'm talking about. But other than that, you know, you still do it. And especially when you're doing like pitching television shows to places that are kind of bigger, even if you're doing it in a way where like, oh, okay, we're going to do this, but we're not going to explain it to everyone. We're not going to do this. We're going to make it for Natives. You still have to do it a little. You have to do it in context. You know what? You don't have to do it in like a cringy, let me explain to you over voiceover or whatever it is, you know. There are shows that do that, but like you don't have to do it like that, but you have to make it within context that people understand it. And you can do that. You know, I've watched Golden Girls and I don't understand half the references, but I know it's funny because of the context clues. So you can do it in a way that's not cringy. But yeah, it's still there, especially if it's any mainstream platform. It's gonna be what we're gonna be doing for the next 10 years. Just that's part of it. Or not. I mean, like you can do it any way you want. I'm just saying, like for me, that's my experience of, yeah, if I work with a non-Native, I'm gonna have to do a lot of explaining.
Yeah, thanks. Miranda?
Yeah, there have been times where I've, been consulting on projects, or I worked on this one film. It was a USC graduate thesis, and um, I wasn't in the class. I was just I was helping out as a producer, and I was the only one of the only Indigenous people on the crew, other than this one other woman who also wasn't in the class. And it was just a lot of taking our time to explain, these cultural things, because it was a Native American piece. It was about murdered, missing Indigenous women. And so that was very challenging, because it's sharing something that's very personal to your life, and can be very raw and triggering. And standing up in that classroom full of graduate students that have no idea what this world's like, and sharing your truth, and listening to ignorant professors give comments about spirit animals that just don't make sense. And so I think it takes just a really tough skin to be in those situations, to be able to share your experiences, and just tolerate all of the nonsense that you may have to listen to. But in the end, I find it very rewarding. And I do think we still have a lot of educating to do on these sets and about these stories. But something I'm excited about is seeing more opportunities for Native storytellers to be the ones driving those stories. So we're not just consulting, we're not just answering the questions and giving the stamp of approval. So I think the future will be better.
Yeah, any other thoughts about kind of how that does, though? Because that's an extra layer of work for each of us, right? To go into a space where you're going to have armor on, you're going to have thick skin, and it's sort of at odds with the vulnerability that maybe you want to bring to the art that you're making.
I think that's in any industry. We realize you go into any room, we're the minority of the minorities. So you pick any industry, whether it's business or film and television production, half the conversation is just catching them up to speed. But in terms of media, I like that it's becoming more level, because there's creative choices, and there's how do you engage the audience? So I think that's what levels the playing ground for us. Because if it's boring, that's just across it's just across the narrative if it's boring. But if you can engage an audience and make that connection, whoever it is, whether it is just Native or non-Native, I think that puts us ahead by far.
Yeah, and I worked on an all Native writing room show for Netflix, and I will say this: the amount of work it takes when you have to introduce distinctly Native concepts disappears, and you realize oh wow, we can move a lot quicker, right? When I say something, I don't have to add 2 to 3 sentences later, explaining what it is. We can move a lot quicker, and obviously, even then with in the writing of it to an audience that's not necessarily all Native, you still have to do in context, but that's all writing. All writing should be clear what's going on, regardless of what it is. But and actually, I think that's true for the most part. Most of the explaining in the work I do is explaining to the non-Natives behind the scenes. But in the writing, it's going to be the same, because no matter what, you're going to be right. You should write clear things regardless. So I feel on the page, it's not any more work, but it's behind the scenes that actually becomes really harder. And when you start working with a lot of Natives, you realize how okay, quick, we can move on. So I can't give away the stories. Never mind. I was gonna make a joke, but it's a storyline, so no.
Yeah, I have to agree and add to that. It's very exhausting. You have to have a lot of patience. Every project that I've been on, I have had to explain and educate, and that's exhausting, especially when I'm brought on to consult on things. And it can be very frustrating when you're really brought on as a consultant just for them to say, hey, we consulted with somebody. But then you look at the work afterwards, and then you're like, wait a minute, what were you paying attention? Did you take notes? Really? Okay. I have one example. There was a project where they were asking me for referrals because they're like, we can't find any Native actors. We can't find, right? And I'm like, really? In LA, you can't? Okay, all right, right. So that's a running thing where people will call me like, hey, do you have somebody you can send? Da, da, da. Because, I know a lot of actors. And I'll make the referrals and I'll make the connection and everything. And then for this one particular project, I ended up seeing who got cast in it. And the two leads, which were supposed to be natives, they were not natives. And then on set, like I'm there, I'm watching, and they're like, oh, well, they're not dark enough. Just put some dirt on their face. Right. And I'm on set like, what? So I've had a lot of those moments where I'm like, I don't understand. Like, they say they want to know. I know we're not monolithic, so it does take time to explain the specificity of things. But I just have to wonder sometimes, like, really, do they really want to know, or are they just consulting, right? So that's been my experience. And that's why I'm like, well, why do you just not hire the native writer, right? Somebody who actually knows this stuff, as opposed to like, let me just ask some questions and then, well, I'm going to do what I'm going to do anyway, which they're going to do anyway, as I've seen, it's been my experience. So you have to have a lot of patience. It's frustrating, but I do see it changing slowly but surely right now. And that's because of the projects that we are doing. So I'm very happy about that. Finally, there's some change there, but yeah, I've had a lot of those kind of moments where you're just like, really? Okay.
Gosh, I've, just for my experience, since I'm still so steeped in so much of my life, a good high percentage of it is theater. Yeah, the conversations are completely different when it comes to these very I don't know, I think at the basis of it, you're telling stories, you're telling narrative stories. But I personally, I don't like being the cultural consultant. So I won't take those jobs because it doesn't make me feel good. I don't enjoy talking to people who I know don't want to listen. So I would say I find agency in who I want to teach and how I want to be in a room. For instance, I was a story editor on a feature film coming out of Toronto last winter, and I guess at the end of the day, I think you and I don't. I prefer to be picky than to be deeply upset. But I know that's I don't even know if it's a luxury for anyone or if it's a personal choice or whatever it is. But I know that at some point we're going to be giving advice to younger people. But I would say you actually don't have to take jobs that kill your soul or work with people who do that. For this particular project, I didn't want to be a cultural consultant. I asked to be the story editor, that I wouldn't do anything else, and I wouldn't give, my time and expertise and lived experience about being Native and Navajo in this specific instance, without, I just didn't want to be in a position where what I was saying was just going to sort of be pushed aside. So as a story editor, it was really fantastic in helping the writers look at the structure of their script and strengthen the characters. And it actually felt good to talk about how can you put Native people, now, okay, here's your first draft that has Native characters in it. How can you create higher level ways of thinking and being for these Native characters rather than letting them do what usually is done is like Native wallpaper, right? Or, all of these kinds of stereotypes. So it was, in that way, it was really wonderful. And also I was working with with writers who were from LGBTQ community. And that was also something on my part that was very, very intentional, and why I felt like it was a safer space, and why I would want to put more time and effort into writers who were coming from and trying to open up other marginalized spaces. And for me, that just felt so nice, And what it told me is I can do this work. I can consult about Native culture and projects in a way where I still feel like I have agency, and the outcome is impactful, rather than sort of like soul sucking. Because, believe me, in theater there are so many opportunities for soul sucking, and I'm done with that.
Yeah,
I had a
find
lot of experience. Yeah.
I find that in trying to find traction for plays I've written as a non-binary person, I write plays with non-binary and trans characters. And I had like one of my first potential big breaks with somebody at a festival that when I was like, here are the character demands, you're going to need to find at least 3 non-binary or trans actors. They were like, we don't really have time for that. We'll just get some really good male actors and we think that they'll really understand the part. And you're like, you have fundamentally misunderstood what we're doing here. So having covered the parts of the job that tend towards soul sucking, could you also each share someone or something that really inspires you, that encourages you to just do what you want to do better?
I'll just jump in again. I always think about my father. My father is probably the person who inspired me to be a storyteller, and inspired it in a rooted way that is culturally, just like from our, what it was like being Navajo growing up, and just how important knowing who you are is. And I always just wanted to show him stories where he could see himself. So he's yeah, my dad, I'm a big old daddy's girl, and he's still my biggest inspiration.
I think I'm just inspired by the diversity of storytelling going on right now, that there's other perspectives out there and there's actually opportunity. And that's kind of what keeps me going, is just creating opportunity for people. Whereas in the past, you never saw that, saw an opening for us to be in directing or in writing. So that's what kind of motivates me, that once you create that chance that there's an opportunity, then they can see farther down the line. It's like, okay, I belong there. There's actually space for me.
I was inspired. I think I'm most inspired by a Best Buy commercial. Yeah, it's just some.
I hear that so often.
Yeah. So there's this Best Buy commercial, not on the network. It's on their website, to give you the level of commercial that it is. But I saw like a native there. I'm like, oh, that's a native. Like, yes. And like that inspires me the most, because like all these firsts are amazing and they are inspiring. But like when we can just be, and when we can be in these just pervasive throughout society, and we're no longer erased, we're no longer invisible, we're just hanging out at a Best Buy, trying to return some Beats headphones. Like when society can see us there, when we're no longer this, this exotic, this new, that's what inspires me, to be able to see like, oh, hey, they're just there, they're living their lives. And it's not this like monumental first, which are again amazing, but like I'm excited to see, the Native American doctor on a procedural, the Native American, restaurant waiter, like those parts, because that means we're truly included and we're in the consciousness, and it's not like a very special story where they go to the casino. Like, no, those are the worst stories. Or let's go to the reservation and learn for this episode only. No, like I'm most, that most inspires me. And then there's a Gap commercial 6 months beforehand. The fact that I can point these out shows that we don't have enough of it. But those are what I truly inspire me, because I'm like, hey, look, we're people. And once that can be put everywhere, I don't know, that's what warms my heart, actually.
For me, I actually volunteer over the summers, and I teach film camp to kids from 6 years old to 18 years old. And I give them agency by teaching them how to write, direct, produce, and star in their own short films. And so every summer we give them like a Hollywood premiere with the red carpet and everything, and they bring their families and the communities come out. And for me, just watching those kids see themselves up on the big screen in non-stereotypical roles, you know, just playing themselves, those big, brown, beautiful faces, and they're so proud of their work. That's what keeps me going and inspires me, because for me, I know that it's about teaching the next generation how to have their own agency so that they can tell their stories and just be proud of where they come from. So that's what keeps me going and inspired.
That actually did remind me of something that is really inspiring and less funny. But I also taught in Minnesota these like, basically it's part of like a television film writing class, but the class that I specifically told was about how to tell your story, right? Your self pitch, because in television you meet a lot of people, so you have to learn how to pitch yourself, right? So like I taught them how to do it, and then I went by and I went to do it, and it was hard for so many. It was so, like, they had never ever talked about themselves and their lives and their story, and like more than you think would cry. Like they started crying because that had never happened before. It was, you know, it was tough, but that inspires me, because if we can, you know, introduce that, if that can be this new generation of Indigenous kids who are actually able to tell their stories, because it is impactful. And, you know, if you haven't done it your whole life, it can be emotional. And Best Buy.
I guess for me, like in my industry, there haven't been a ton of Indigenous game designers and developers, but there's this woman, Beth LaPensay, and I met her when I was in college, and I was exploring some game ideas, and she has done a lot of writing and academic work in the field. And, you know, I wasn't expecting to receive really a response, but she really took me under her wing and introduced me to a lot of other game developers and always supported me. And I just, you know, her work was really inspiring to me, because she was just living her true, authentic self and putting that in her work. And she got backlash from people for the work that she did. She made a game about, you know, it was called Thunderbird Strike, and it's about pipelines and the oil industry. And she had, you know, she was pursued by oil companies and had to deal with a lot. But I just thought it was so cool that, you know, no matter what, like, she was really being authentic and sharing that story despite what, you know, what came her way. And I've always found her to be very inspiring, and I'm really grateful that, you know, she's done a lot for the game world.
Thank you all for sharing. I feel inspired to go figure out. I mean, I do think that's really important, right? The opportunities not only to be like mundane, but to be terrible in new and inventive ways, right? To not always have to be inspiring and motivational and full of wisdom, to just be, you know, like the jackasses we all grew up with, right? That's
I hope I inspire a generation of jackasses, of native jackasses. I hope they're like Lucas. He inspired me to be a jackass. I look up to him.
Yeah, it's just like what Sonya said. So you can see a little further down the road. That's really the cool. So pivoting to the future, could you share some advice or some experiences that helped you grow your career that you think might be of use to USC students who are watching, both Native and non-Native alike?
Learn how to pitch yourself. I know I just got done talking, but there's a reason why I teach that class and no other. One, it's the only thing I know how to do. Two, it's the most valuable thing, I think, as a TV writer, and as many things, you know, as a director, so many things this applies to. But if you can learn how to pitch yourself, what you're really doing is you're learning how to tell an interesting story. The story just happens to be of your life, right? And you got to do it quick, and it's got to be effective, and, you know, should be emotional, should be a bunch of things, right? But like, once you do that, I think that's probably the most effective tool that I've used. Just general meetings, pitch meetings, everything you do, you're kind of selling yourself. And I mean that not in a cynical way. It can be, protect yourself, but like, once you know yourself and you kind of know what you can bring to the table and your unique point of view, it becomes not only a tool that you can go and just turn it on and off, but it becomes empowerment, because you know what you bring to the table.
I just try and share to whoever I'm speaking to, whatever the audience is. You can't get out of the work. There's no shortcuts. I think I've tried to get out of like trying to figure out non-linear editing, and it was like overwhelming. But you can't, there's no shortcut. You just have to put the time in and the hours in to do the work. And also, like when it gets depressing and you think no one's noticing your ideas, or you're not like getting the satisfaction from the audience that you think you should be getting, realize that people are always watching and they probably want to be where you are. So I think that just kind of is just like a little, if it were easy, everyone, this panel would be like the hundreds on this panel. So I just think you just keep going.
I tell my students that all the time because I teach mostly college freshmen. And I'm like, if this was easy, everybody would do it and I wouldn't have a job. So let's all take a minute and be grateful that it's hard because it feeds me and it feeds the dog.
My advice would be to stay connected to the joy, because it is a business. And as an artist, you know, I've spent years just as an artist, not focusing on the business part of it. But then again, how are you going to get your bills paid and your rent, right? So it is show business. So I would advise any filmmaker, you know, to be well-rounded, to understand how the industry actually works and the business aspect of it. And also to double down. I mean, if you're at USC already, you already have doubled down in the sense that, you know, you're investing in your own education and career. But I would take it a step further and say, you know, tell your story, do your project. Don't wait for anybody to give you that green light, because you can green light yourself. We all have cell phones. I'm connected right now through my cell phone. I can shoot a whole feature on a cell phone, or a short, or a webisode, whatever that may be, music video, whatever it is you want to do. I'm sure you have, you know, your cohorts that you can, you know, say, hey, do you want to star in this, right? Just write the project, get it done, double down on yourself. You've already invested this much time, so just get it done, you know? There's a lot of fundraising that you can do online, you know, ask your family and friends. But if you're going to be waiting literally for somebody to come and give you that big check just for you to make your first project, then you're going to be waiting, I don't know how long, but a long time. So that would be my advice, is literally, if it is something that you love and it's something that you want to do, stay connected to the joy and double down on it, and just get your project out there. You know, people have to know who you are, and you know, what stories you're telling, so that we know who you are as a filmmaker, whether you're an actor, writer, director, producer. You know, what do you bring to the table, and who are you? I think that's the most important thing that I would have to say.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, because you know, I know this audience of USC filmmakers and others, but speaking of the USC filmmakers, because I know them, I've been them. Don't worry about the big budget getting it made. Tell an amazing story. If it's not good, who cares? Because like realistically, and this may be just my opinion, but from what I've seen is there are $100 million movies, and then there, you know, everything trickles down, and there's kind of $100 million, and then 5 million, and then there's just everything else. Like, you're not going to compete with even a $5 million movie, which is considered low budget now, sadly. But production wise, you're not going to compete. But you know what you can do? Compete story wise. You can compete with all the creative elements that people want. And especially when you're first starting out, there's like this pressure. I know everyone did it. They had to get the cool set. They had to get the camera. They had to get all this stuff, and it became like an arms race. But you know what that race, it doesn't include? The story, the acting, the quality, the directorness, the writing, all that stuff that people actually are hiring you for, because they're not hiring you to make it usually, unless you are like a grip or a DP or something. Okay, that's separate. Okay, speaking to some of you USC writing people, the directors and the writers and the actors, just get out there and do it. Because you can sit around waiting for the right opportunity. Oh, this isn't going to look great. I don't have this. I don't have that. Just make it and focus on what you can do, which is great story, great directing. Because, you know, we all know the examples. Always Sunny, you know, Issa Rae's career. You know, like everyone, we've seen the examples of, oh, they just went out and made it, and those weren't $1 million productions. It's totally possible, and I think that's the cool thing that you can focus on, because a lot of this industry is just out of your power.
The advice I would give is be patient and persistent. I feel like, at least in my field, I had a really hard time getting into, a big AAA studio, whereas I, friends just getting there. And I just often get frustrated, like, I'm not where I want to be. Like, I want to be doing X, Y, Z, but I just stayed persistent and kept, chipping away at where I wanted to be, and use whatever experiences I could get to leverage my way to where I wanted to be. I still get frustrated with, like, I sometimes feel like I don't have a big impact. I'm a producer for an engineering team. I'm not, writing the game stuff, or, designing new game modes or anything like that. But my impact's still important. And I, have consulted with the screenwriters at my studio. I've, worked with people in the diversity groups. And even though I feel like I'm not, doing the big making my own story stuff right now, I am seeing a lot of amazing benefits from the work I am doing. And I think, you don't expect to always, you find that fulfillment in places that you didn't think you would end up, but just stay persistent at, what your values are, and what, how you want to be living out your truth, and it'll all be okay.
Yeah, I would second every single thing everybody here has said. But I think the thing that I would add to that that young Native person who's getting into this industry is that I think it's really important to know yourself and your culture in a way that is that keeps you deeply connected to knowing who you are, because I think the unique thing about being an Indigenous person is that we come from cultures that still follow the original rules of life, stories of life that our ancestors were given. And that's only 5% of the world population that still follows those original instructions, right? I guess I'm just trying to get to this thing about being a Native person and coming from a tribal affiliation, is that there are specific cosmologies and ways to be in our language and our spirituality. And if you are disconnected from those things, then you are disconnected from yourself as a Native, as an Indigenous person. So I think just whatever you need to do to stay in that original instructions of your culture and your community, because at the end of the day, I don't think that we're all here getting into it so that we can compromise ourselves, or to be complicit with white supremacy just because we just want to do this job. I think, I know for me, what happens to generations after me is deeply important as to what's happening to me now, and the stories I want to tell are going to live on for those generations after. And so that's what I would just remind you, just to sink back down into those values and make your success based on those values, rather than forgetting who you are, who you are as a Native person, and why you do this, and how you conduct yourself. So that's what I would just say that as a reminder.
Thank you. That was a really beautiful reminder. And it segues beautifully into my next question, which to ask each of you to talk a little bit about sort of how you bring a sense of place or rootedness or those traditions into your work. Like, what was a time when you felt very conscious of, like, I'm putting this is the story that I'm telling, and here's why? I'm asking because some of us still have stayed very connected to those places, right? The places that are home, the places that are traditional, and others have moved and left. And there's both freedom and loss in that, right? What you're able to bring with you.
I'm afraid to answer because because someone will follow and say, well, it was a Best Buy commercial for me. So
No, so for me, I'm at the point in my career where people want that from me. So everything I do, I now have the ability to bring anything I want to do with it, which is, you know, it's a privilege to be at that point. And of course, by that, I mean, usually development, usually I tell the stories that I want to tell. And I'm at the point where I can kind of tell them the way I want to tell them. But like early on, it was a struggle. And you know, culturally, I think as a writer, you're always giving a piece of you. You're always giving your point of view when you meet with the showrunner to meet on a room. They want to know why you are good for their show. And when you tackle any writing piece, it's why are you the best writer to tell this, right? Regardless of that. So that's kind of how I approach it, is why am I the best writer for this story? And for me, now that I can, it's because of my life, my lived experience, my family, my culture, all of that. So that's kind of how I approach things, is why am I writing this? What's the point? And for me, I want Native representation. I want to tell this story, and you know, that's how I approach it. So that's kind of how I do it. Is my entire job is now mining my life and mining the things that I want to see.
I'll chime in. This is a really hard one for me. So I was adopted as a baby and didn't grow up in my tribe. I didn't reconnect with my bio family until I was in college. And so I feel like I was always kind of struggling with my identity, struggling with, you know, ownership of my heritage. And so I think now in my work, it's, you know, that is an experience that's very unique to me. This is my cat, he's annoying. But that was an experience that, you know, I wasn't really comfortable talking about, but now when I do like consulting work, or I am talking about, or when I, you know, do volunteer work, topics like ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, is very important to me. I've worked with museums and on topics of like removal and trauma. And so these are some really, you know, some really interesting pieces that I never really thought I would ever share in the work I do. And I think, you know, now that I am connected more with my tribe and I'm really getting more involved with my family and stuff, I think that will really help change my story over time, and I'll be able to share more of that impact of my life. But it's definitely been an interesting experience just seeing myself grow since graduating college.
I love to tell my students that too, when they're like afraid of whatever's right in front of them. I'm like, this is not the end of it. I mean, maybe that's not reassuring, but like, if you're lucky, you're going to be wrestling with this for a long time.
Yeah, because I remember in college, like, you know, I feel like there were always expectations that I tell this very Native American story, but I wasn't comfortable with that at that point in time. And I still had an important story to share, but it wasn't that stereotypical, you know, Native story. So I think, you know, we all have our different stories and our different paths, and they're all very important. And someone out there will be really excited to hear it.
For me, going back to one of the first actually plays I ever wrote, it was for a final in high school, and I turned it in, and I remember the professor saying, but this has nothing to do with where you're coming from, right? And I was just like, what do you mean? And he was trying to tell me what story to tell at that moment, right? But that's the story that I wanted to tell at that moment. And he's like, no, go back and rewrite it. So I remember for my final, I turned in 2 of these stories, right? And I was just like conflicted, because I'm like, well, I really want to be authentic in what I'm saying, but he's not accepting that, right? He's telling me what my story is, what I'm supposed to do. And I remember at that moment, I was just like, well, I guess for the grade, if that's what I got to do, I'll give him what he wants. But I said to him, I'm turning in both of them, right? This is the one I wanted to tell. This is the one that you want. And that moment really impacted me, because after that, I said, you know what, I'm going to be authentic in everything that I do. I'm going to tell my own stories. And as an only child, I mean, there's just something about like being told what to do. That's, you know, I'm just like, no, but this is what I want to do, right? So I've been very fortunate to be able to do my own projects, which is really why I do my own projects, because I'm able to tell the stories that I want to tell and cast the people I want to cast. So for my next feature, I'm doing it through language. I have a lot of Nahuatl, indigenous language in there, and that's really important for me because the traditions and all the cultural stories that I have to tell, I haven't seen them on the big screen yet. So that's something that I'm like, well, that's going to be my job to do, right? And hopefully my high school teacher will be able to watch that and say, oh, that's the story you wanted to tell, I get it now. But we'll see. So yeah, I try to be as authentic as I can, especially with the language.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I always feel like I am best at telling stories that sort of somewhere live in my lived experience, and I think that's and it, one of the things that really shows in my storytelling is like I've lived in like three significant like in three different cities in my adult life that have had like a significant sort of way the Native community is. So growing up in New Mexico, living in Los Angeles for a while, and now being out here in Dakota Territory in the Twin Cities, I just feel like I'm constantly really influenced by the Native people on whose land I'm on, and so a lot of that influences the stories that I want to tell, and I think that it's really an interesting thing to talk about. What is that experience of being a Native person, Native woman in 2021, who is affected by all of these programs that have happened to us, right? Relocation to big cities, or like chasing jobs in different cities, and yet still connecting with the different Native communities that are there. And I find like intertribal stories are really fun, really interesting. Like, like you put together like a Navajo, a Lakota, and Ojibwe, and then it's just like, oh my God, all the all of the fun the fun arguing ensues. So it's just like I think it's that kind of stuff that like only like you would know about it if you were like in the Indian community, but like people outside of our communities, like they don't have a clue about like how we interact with each other. And so that's definitely a way that I stay rooted, and because I think that there are, I mean, honestly, there are a lot of different ways to be, and a lot of that has to do with sort of recent government history and how and why we as Native people have been pulled apart from families, or culture taken, or pushed to cities, or or family back home on the res. And I think all of the telling all of those stories that it takes to that is part of that contemporary experience of Native is really important to tell all those different corners.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring in a question from the chat that's a little bit specific to USC, but I think we can also generalize to other institutions. So the question asker asked, are you all still involved at USC, and is USC doing a good job at recruiting and retaining Native American talent like this panel? How could USC or other institutions that you're coming into contact with be more attractive for interested Native American students as well as artistic faculty?
I can go. I try to stay involved with USC. I graduated in 2016, so not super long ago. And so I'm involved in the Women of Cinematic Arts organization, and I really want to bring more voices there and support students that are coming out of school via that organization. And I've also, when I was a junior, well, I was senior and super senior in school. I helped found the Native American Student Union, which is now the Native American Student Assembly. And so, you know, at that time, I remember like putting posts, like printouts up on in all the buildings of like a Native American person. And I was like, "Is this you? Like, join my club," and like posting on Facebook, like, "I'm looking for Native Americans." And you know, I felt hopeless that a lot of the times, just like feeling so alone at USC. And so to plant those seeds, and now I start to see that coming, you know, it's starting to grow more, and there's more students. And I saw a picture of them meeting this year, and there's a lot of people at that meeting. I was like, wow, like when I was there, it was like 5 of us. So I think USC has a very long way to go, especially having such a large Native American population in Los Angeles. I was always shocked that we had such little representation in our student body. Very few like faculty members, there's no like administrative support for Native students, and I still feel like that's lacking. I do believe they've added recruiters to specifically target Native communities, but you know, it's one thing to try to recruit them, but how do you keep them there? Like throw them into the you know, LA and away from their families and with very little support. It's a lot to ask students to thrive in that setting. And I do hope that USC can do more, just more support, more scholarships. You know, the scholarships I got didn't cover anything. And so I still have student debt. So maybe eventually student debt forgiveness for Native students. That would be something that would really help people. I think there's a lot of ways we can do better as USC is one of the top universities in the nation. And I hope I can help do that too.
I totally second getting rid of Native student debt. Yes.
Amen. Any other thoughts? I mean, I know you're all involved. A lot of you are involved with different organizations, right? Whether you are contributing to them or they recruited you. And I'm just interested in sort of what those conditions can look like, because we've talked about, you know, the burden of being always the diversity consultant, or the burden of like, they want you there, but they don't necessarily make the atmosphere feel good once you're there. Is there any kind of wish list that you have when you're sizing up an institution to decide if you're going to get involved? You're like, oh, they have that. Maybe I'll go. Speak it into existence.
Yeah, I remember. So I'll talk more on this, I guess. But I remember I was, you know, going to all these schools in high school and visiting all these, you know, big Ivy League schools, and they'd always pair me up with a Native student, and they'd be like, "Oh, like this is so and so, they're Native from Oklahoma, show me around," or whatever. And I always thought like, "Oh, that's so cool, like there might be a community I can join and like get to know people." And USC was like the only school that didn't have that. So I think having more structure within the student body to support, you know, have that support system, I just feel like we need more support there from professors. I'd like to see more, you know, Native professors in the cinematic arts school.
Everywhere else besides anthropology.
Yeah. I remember like the only Native class we had was one anthropology class, and I took it, and I think it was taught by a white professor at the time I was there. And I was just like, okay, like I'm out of place here.
Yeah, I will second that. I was recruited by Harvard, pretty much every Ivy League, NYU, UCLA, not USC. So I applied there because I wanted to go, and that was like my dream. But like, yeah, I will say that like suspiciously not USC. Everyone
Playing
else.
hard to get worked on you though.
I was one of those students who wasn't recruited by anybody. And the reason I was like USC is because of The Graduate, right? It was filmed at USC. And that's like one of my favorite movies of all time. And like every time I watch a film and like it, you know, it's an academic institution, USC is always the best place to film. So I don't know. Maybe there was a part of me that was like, you know, imagining Dustin Hoffman go from Tommy Trojan all the way across the quad. But yeah, I actually I don't know. I think definitely, everything Miranda is saying about how things can improve. Because I think being intentional about Native students is super important. I definitely think USC has the funding to be able to do that sort of thing, and to really take it seriously. The land acknowledgements, and what does that mean about really nourishing Native students who are there, especially like I'd love to see tuition free, for Tongva students, So I just think there's a lot that USC could totally do.
There's a lot of ways to go beyond those land acknowledgements. Yeah, when I was teaching at my last school in DC, one of my few Native colleagues had made an Indigenous guide to DC that was like a walking tour app that you could do. And so that was something I was offered in my classes. Like, if you go to a site and write about it, like go out into a place and experience it, as opposed to just being like, yep, this is what the land is.
Yeah, I do remember the Native American class I took. They offered off extra credit for any like powwow or Native American event you went to, and I had the highest grade in the class because I went home. And I took, I take my classmates. I was like, oh, let's go to the film festival. Let's go to this powwow, fry bread. But I just, it was really I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed sharing that with my peers. But it would, only a few people did it, and so I think there's definitely, if there's more incentives for professors to offer credit, to engage with the Tongva, the historical areas and stuff like that. I think just having that in all levels of education would be really cool to see at USC.
I think we got time for pretty much one more round, and I would just love to hear you each offer your earlier childhood selves a piece of advice. What, knowing now, would you tell little you then?
Invest in Bitcoin.
How do I block somebody from my webinar?
Yeah. No, back in 2011. Come on. Not now. 2011. Just then. No, don't stress yourself out, because the trajectory that you think you're gonna have is not gonna be the one you have. It's going to be vastly different and better in many ways, worse in some, but overall better. Enjoy the process, and kind of focus on what you want to do, and don't lose yourself in all the rest of it, and just enjoy telling the stories, because you never know when that thing will hit. You never know when you'll get your break, but as long as you're doing what you want to do, that's the fulfilling part. Because everyone, they look, it's like, oh, I want to do this, and like all the stuff is cool, the producer credit, the parking lot, oh, that's cool, but like the reason why you're doing it, because why don't you just be some rich person doing some, I don't know, rich person thing? I don't know how people make money. I've been a writer my whole life, okay? But the point is, you can do many things for all those perks. The reason why you want to be a writer or a director or an actor is because that's what you want to do. And the cool thing is, we're at a point in life where you can do that constantly. That is what you can do. You can live your dream every day, and it'll be harder because money makes things easier. But like, focus on that part, because that's the fundamental part that'll still be fulfilling 10 years down the line, 30 years down the line. That's it. I think the planet has about 30 years. So just enjoy it.
I like that we're really covering a spectrum. Nothing shows the diversity among Indian country. Then we got 30 years. Let's think about 7 generations. Let's just really, best and worst case scenario, we're covered entertainment wise. Anybody else advice for their little inner child?
My advice to myself would just be, don't be so scared. I feel like I was always afraid, of my story. I was afraid of failing, afraid of, picking up the camera and trying things. And it was probably my senior years that I really started to get that confidence in my own voice. And I just wish I would have found that earlier in school. But even though I didn't, I've found my way, and I got the cat I always wanted. So things work out. But yeah, just don't be afraid. And it's okay to mess up. It's okay to have failures and to make bad grades every now and then. Because it's all about your journey, and where you keep moving. Don't stop.
And after college, nobody cares about your transcript but you. Keep going.
It's true. It's true. Except if you want to go to law school.
Right. But then you have bigger problems,
That's, yeah, because you want to be a lawyer.
I think I would tell myself to follow my intuition and just stay connected to that, because there's been moments in my life where, somebody else says something else, but I know better, and I go down that path and I'm like, oh, why didn't I just listen to myself? So I would just say, just listen to your gut instinct and your spiritual higher self, because you always know what's best for you, and only you know what's best for you. I also would say, stop worrying so much, because whatever is yours and no one can take away from you. So just go for it and do what you love.
I think the intuition thing is important, because a lot of times you do know the answer, and for some reason you have to go through these different layers of there's like this second guessing, third guessing, fourth, but you always know what the right answer is. And then my advice for younger self would probably just be write down more recipes, because I think we've lost some of our family recipes, and I should have wrote down some of them. I should have paid attention more. I was probably watching I was probably watching the Munsters or something.
Yeah, I think the advice I'd give, the intuition thing, so right on. There have been times in my career where the power that be that I was working with sort of forced me to work with people or to engage in a project with people that I just knew deep inside was a bad idea. So I would push back and say, nope, and practice saying nope more often. And I would also just say to my younger self, keep more of your older female mentors closer, and just stick tight to them. Because I think as a woman in this field, it is different. We do have different trajectories, or at least it has been up until this point. And I think it's really, really important to get perspective on women who are just a bit, who've gone through more than you have, and just to see what that was like, ask life questions to them, I would say, because I think that, for women who are going in this field, chances are, like the other women that are close to us, like our mothers and aunties, they don't know the kind of stuff we have to put up with. So really find those mentors who are in the industry, who can just keep you connected and sane. Yeah, it's strong sisterhood. It's important.
Thank you all, and Wado for joining us. Thank you to everybody who tuned in to watching. It was lovely to meet you all. Keep an eye out for other LA Skins Fest events coming up November 16th through the 21st, including an on-campus panel on November 18th, Native American Women in Animation. Alex, would you like to take us out?
Oh, just to say thank you all so much especially for putting up with the random relocation of my office in the middle of this panel. Maddox, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you guide us tonight, and it was such a wonderful experience to hear from all these wonderful USC graduates. So thank you all so much, and we look forward to hosting our next LA Skins Fest event live and on campus. So that should be very exciting, and thank you, Patty, again for another great night. Oh, you're muted.
I just said thanks.
Sorry about that. Yes, what Alex said. Thank you everyone for being in part of the panel, and thank you for spending this evening with us. We will see you in November 18, like Alex said, and have a good night.